Welcome to the Dr. Diane Show, where we explore revolutionary expansion of mind, body, and soul with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. With over 20 years of expertise as a mindset warrior, perspective shifter, and unshakable optimist, I am dedicated to helping you reach your wildest dreams in business, health, performance, and relationships. Learn about the power of thought and how it shapes your life to take risks, change careers, find love, go on adventures, and live passionately with me, Dr. Diane. Get ready for revolutionary ways of thinking, being, and creating an amazing life. The Dr. Diane Show starts now. Stay with us for the next hour, where we will explore revolutionary expansion of mind, body, and soul. Each time on the Dr. Diane Show, we have experts from around the country discussing cutting-edge topics on longevity medicine, natural health, mindset, and soul purpose to help you shift your perspective and become a mindset warrior like me. I'm excited today to have James Osborne on my show. He's been a psychotherapist for over 45 years. He's an author, lecturer, workshop presenter who has worked in the US, Europe, and presented in China. He has written for Natural Nutmeg Magazine and other publications and has been a 10 Best Award winner for the past 6 years. He began his psychotherapy career in the late 70s at Middlesex Hospital, working inpatient and outpatient mental health before working in employee assistance programs for RADAR, which is the Regional Alcohol Drug Resources, Inc. And he worked for United Technologies at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft, EAP, and was the manager of special health services for Hamilton Standard. In the early 1990s, he was the director of the Connecticut Association for Jungian Psychology, and has served as a clinical director and supervisor for several organizations over the years. He currently maintains a limited private practice in Berlin, Connecticut with Pro Natural Wellness Group. He employs mindfulness, Jungian psychology, Gestalt Psychology, EMDR, and value-based techniques unique to the individual to support positive health changes. So welcome, James. How are you today?
Well, thank you, Diane. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah. So normally I like to start my shows by learning a little bit more about your background. I mean, my listeners are always curious about kind of the journey that took you to doing what you do and becoming a therapist. So I guess let's start there. Like, tell us, how did that all happen?
Well, I think I hold on to the whole idea that there's sort of the wounded healer syndrome. I think that as a kid, I was one of those people you didn't want to have around, had the little black cloud over his head, so I kind of did that. And part of that had to do with the fact that at a very young age, I couldn't see. I had ended up having surgery for lazy eye at the time, but the way they treated it back in the early 50s was they had to cut the muscle and pull the eye out and do all that kind of stuff. So what happened is I learned to listen really well, and I had developed an incredible sense of my own awareness around my body. And so getting a message here. Let me just close that. And so that was kind of my own setup, where I started my own mindset of things and never really knowing what was going to be coming up next, because of the vision kind of thing. And then later on, I mean, I had gone off and to college, and I had a college roommate who convinced me that the two of us should join the Army together in 1967. And I was stupid enough to listen to him. And of course, he failed the physical, and they took my sorry ass away. But anyway, after I went through that, I came back and went to college again, and I majored in philosophy. And I was on my way to Georgetown for a doctoral program in philosophy. And sort of life got in the way. I was going through a divorce and a number of other things. And what ended up happening is that after a couple of years of kind of working, I found that they were opening a program at Southern Connecticut, which was in Gestalt Psychotherapy, and it was a 2-year program. And that's how I kind of worked my way in. And I worked it in because I've always thought that psychology, in a way, and therapy is really applied philosophy, so that one has to kind of get clear on how one thinks, how one talks, being present, mindfulness, all of those things. So that's how I ended up there. So it was kind of a convoluted journey, you know.
Yeah, but interesting for sure. So I want to talk about, I guess I want to define some things because I feel like people hear about these types of psychology, but they may not necessarily understand what it really is.
Mhm.
So, like Gestalt psychology, for example, explain in your words or your opinion, like what type of therapy is that?
Well, Gestalt was kind of interesting. I really don't practice that much of it anymore, but it's a way of getting the unconscious to be conscious. And it's very much tied to sort of the body in terms of how you might hold things in and that kind of thing, and then how we interpret that. Um, the interesting thing about psychology, Gestalt, was it's known for a couple of its techniques. One is the empty chair, where you get to talk uh, to different parts of yourself to kind of get an understanding. And then the other thing was they were big on pounding pillows, you know. And I have to say that when I took that into the real world, when I was working at Middlesex Hospital, I was working with somebody on anger management. And, I'm having him pound the pillows and he's carrying on. And a 38 came out of his pocket and hit the floor. And I went, whoops, what's wrong with this picture?
Right.
Yeah, I'm in it. No.
Yeah.
So I decided that that was not a way to really, and it was really being really mean to the pillows anyway. So, I mean, I don't know why I was doing all that stuff. So I kind of changed my way of doing things. Jungian, on the other hand, is the work of Carl Jung, and that's where I did most of my own individual work, and a lot with dreams and making the unconscious conscious, and working that way using art, many different mediums, and that's sort of where my heart lies in a lot of that. Although I am still consider myself a bit of a philosopher. And I really begin to look at behavior and meaning and how we talk, language that we use. Those are all things that are important to me.
I think it's really interesting that you use that term, like being a philosopher. I don't think I've ever talked to another therapist or ever had anyone that I know who has been in therapy ever say, "Oh, my therapist is like a philosopher." Like that to me is novel. I mean, unique to you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Some people get it and other people don't, but that's okay. And it's okay.
Right, right.
Like my own
Eh,
language here.
Yeah, and right. So I know in working with you and just the articles that you've written for our magazine and all that is you do have a very different approach as far as um how would I explain it? It's almost like the words that you use are very important. You really listen to the words that someone uses, and then you
Mhm.
kind of mirror that back to them. And
Right.
just being more aware of what, the impact that a word can have that you use.
Mhm.
And what does that mean in terms of what the person is thinking or feeling?
Well, let me give you the perfect example of it. And it is a term that a word that's often used, and it's picked up in Gestalt and other forms of psychology as well, and that's the word but. The word but in ordinary language philosophy, there was a person by the name of Strawson, and he'd take and diagram sentences, and he would get somebody'd say da 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 da, but, and he would diagram it. He'd put parentheses around it and put a negative sign out in front of it. Now, it's not the negative sign of mathematics. It's really a diminishing of the word. And what we want to do is we want people to understand that we can have different thoughts and ideas and feelings about a given subject. What we have to do is we have to keep the tension between that. That's what's called the dialectic. And you get it in philosophy, you get it in physics and all that. You want to keep the tension. And what but does is it reduces the meaning of the first part of the sentence. And you know that when somebody says, I love you, but, right? It's like a shoe is going to drop somewhere and you just don't know when.
Or I'm
So,
sorry, but,
yeah, I'm sorry, but
right?
yeah, like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, well, I don't think so. So you want to say, I'm sorry, and, I love you, and I don't like your behavior. These things that we can hold the tension so that whatever is new can arise from that. But if we diminish it, we don't get the movement or the ascension of something new coming up. So those are the kind of things that I look at. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for people to hear that because I bet it's new. I remember the first time I heard, the word but, it's that, like you said, it basically whatever you've said before, but you've now negated or you use the word diminished, let's say.
Yeah.
You've made it lesser.
Yeah.
So, and usually that's the most important part of the sentence. Like you said, I love you, and then whatever, or I'm sorry, or whatever it is. That's the important part of the sentence, I think. And
Yeah.
then what you're doing is you're following it up with, but, here's all these other things that I don't like, or here's all these other problems, or whatever it might be. And it's such as like these words but and are like such sort of people think of them probably as like meaningless little words, but they're really important words in
Oh,
terms
they
of the
are.
one you choose.
Exactly. And our
Yeah.
mindset and how we interpret things. I remember working, was a colleague, a nurse that worked at Pratt and Whitney at one time. And she came in and she had a broken arm and a black eye. And I said, "What happened to you?" And she says to me, "I fell down the stairs." And I looked at her, and you have to understand, I've been a little irreverent all my life. So I said to her, "I've watched you for 2 years walk up and down stairs. So that's bullshit. Who pushed you?" At which point she burst into tears and says, "Well, it's my new boyfriend, but he loves me." And I'm thinking, no, if that's love, I don't want any part of it. And that's what I said. I said, if that's love, I don't want any part of it. It's like, come on, let's talk about action and behaviors and how they have to stand for the things that we're saying. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another perfect example of how important that word is.
Mhm.
And almost in her case, it was more like a justification.
Oh yeah. It was
Yeah.
a way, it's a way of reinforcing denial, if you will.
Right.
It's like, oh, it's not that bad.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
what does
exactly.
it take? Dying? I don't know.
Right. So we're just getting into the tip of it for sure. So more to come. You're listening to the Dr. Diane Show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll explore more of the James Osborne holistic psychotherapist. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're back on the Dr. Diane Show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. But before we continue, I want to make sure everyone knows how to contact me. You can reach me at www.drdianehayden.com or either of my two publications, www.naturalnutmeg.com or www.essentialnaples.com. And you can learn more about James Osborne at www.pronaturalwellness.com. That's PRONATURAL WELLNESS.com. So before the break, we were talking about just the importance of like, these little words that people think are so insignificant, and but, and how much weight they actually carry in
Mhm.
terms of how you use them in a sentence, like to justify something, or, to to maybe explain more about what you're upset about or whatnot.
Mhm.
So I think I mean, it's just interesting in terms of, I think the way some people may have experienced therapy versus the way that you work as a therapist, in terms of like just looking at the meaning of these words and not just, listening to someone talk and saying like, well, how do you feel about that? Or
Yeah,
right.
that's a
So
good one.
what can someone expect when they come to see you on their first visit?
Well, I like that question because my first visit is kind of different for a lot of people. I put aside 2 hours for the first session.
Wow.
And what I do is, I listen to why they're there now, and kind of start off and what brought you here and how did you hear about me, that kind of thing. And then the next thing I do is I begin to set some groundwork about what's important for them to know. Even if they've had therapy before, let them know that this may be a little bit redundant. Then we talk about perspective, point of view, in terms of, how we see the world. And I often use the example of my college roommate who used to wake up every morning and say, life is a poop sandwich, and every day we take another bite. He was a pleasure to be around. I can't even begin to tell you that. Anyway, that's like at the lower end of the perspective of things.
Right.
And then on the other end, you've got Shirley Temple on the Good Ship Lollipop singing and dancing and carrying on. And I say that these are our moods, and there's a spectrum that we can look at them from. And we don't want to be living in either one of those all the time. But we want to be able to move up and down, and we want to be able to move up and down. And I begin then to talk to them about how we can move. And the big key in sort of modern psychology, if you will, is looking at gratitude and appreciation. And those are the things that will raise our moods. It also changes our whole perspective to one of hopefulness in a way. So we begin to talk about that. I ask people to begin a gratitude journal, which I give them a journal to start with, because I don't believe in giving people assignments and then not giving them the tools to have to work with it. So, and in the gratitude journal, I used to ask people to write down 3 things every day they were grateful for. After about 6 months of having done that, I realized I had asked the wrong question because they would write the same 3 things down. I'm grateful for my husband. I'm grateful for my wife. I'm grateful for my children, my job. I was like, stop. No, I want to know about the tender mercies, the little things that happened in life, the things that surprise you, that you go like, oh, somebody opened the door for me today. Somebody said thank you. Those are the kind of things that I wanted to, those little things that happen in
That
life.
we overlook, right?
Yeah. Or we take for
Yeah.
granted,
Yeah.
and so that becomes one of the things that I want people to work on. Then we talk about language. We talk about the fact that, we can have different thoughts and feelings and ideas about things, and that we really need to separate them out. And also that no one can tell us how we feel, right? If we say, I'm hurt, I'm angry, I'm upset, they can't say, no, you're not. My mother was great at that, I work, no, just go do your homework, It's like, yeah, no, that's not working. So what we then do is start to look at what can people talk about, and they can talk about our behavior, not supporting necessarily what we're saying. And that's where I kind of get into really looking at therapy, and there's a form of therapy that over the years matches more with my philosophy background than any other, and that's called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And there we look at, what someone's beliefs are or what they value, and then how are they living their life to support those values. For example, if somebody says, "Oh, my religious spiritual life is the most important thing to me." Okay, so what did you do? Nothing. Did you go to church? Did you pray? Did you meditate? Did you? No, 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 no. Well, then you're not living the value, right? It's like you're not doing anything that supports it. So you either change what you say you value, or you change the behavior. And that sounds like pretty clear cut, and it's not easy to do sometimes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think a great analogy also is health. Like, how many people say my health is the most important thing, or I'm gonna do XYZ this year as
Mhm.
my New Year's resolution, and then a month or 2 months in, they're not
Mhm.
doing any of it.
Right,
So, is that really important? And why haven't you made it a priority?
exactly. See, you're all set now. You've got this. Start just lining
That's because
people.
I've worked with you. What do
No,
you think? Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, what do you see as the most important part of your job as a therapist?
I'm going to answer that two ways, I think. One is I used to teach at the New England Institute of Addiction Studies in the late 80s and into the early 90s. And people would come up, there were new students or people that were just new in the therapy field, and they would say, what's our job? And I'd say, we're forest rangers. People get lost in the woods, they call out, and we go and we meet them where they are, because you got to use that cliche, you got to meet the person where they are, right? So you get there. And the first thing we do is we assess them physically to make sure they don't need help, like bones sticking out where they shouldn't be. And in the case of addiction, does a person need a detox, especially like alcohol or barbiturates or the benzodiazepines, because they could seize if they go through a withdrawal and they're not monitored.
Mm-hmm.
If you have heroin, unless you have fentanyl, which would probably kill you, chances are you're just going to have a bad time, but you won't die from the detox. And the others you will. So we kind of will assess that. And then we ask them, where do you want to go? I want to go to the top of the mountain. Cool. Okay. How do you want to get there? I want to climb the face of the mountain. Man, that's not me. I want to know where the Uber's going to pick me up and take me up, but that's beside the point. So, okay, if you want to, if you're, 5'6" and 400 pounds and not a gorilla, chances are you're going to have to get into some kind of physical shape to climb that mountain face. So you then refer them to people. If you can't teach them those skills, you refer them out to the people. And then what we would basically do is we help people find what they need. We get them to practice new techniques to deal with things that they need to perhaps overcome or whatever. And we walk with them for a little while and we wave goodbye. And if they get lost again or they get stuck again, they call out, and it may be us or it may be somebody else that meets them and helps them out. I think that's sort of my theory on counseling, that people need to play with their own kind of lives. And it's not like you have to come every week or twice a week. And I mean, look at Woody Allen. I mean, 20 years of going to the couch twice a week for an hour, doing his Freudian analysis. To be honest with you, I don't think it helped. I think the boy's still screwed up. So, it's not a matter, it's a matter of what you do with the information that you're getting at your own pace. And this expectation that people have to come every week, I don't agree with. And it's just, I have a different attitude about this. I think what we want to do is empower people to live their lives, and they can come in and out, know that there's no shame or anything that has to do with that if they're doing their work. That's
Right.
for it.
Yeah.
So,
So go ahead.
no, I was going to say, and so the other thing I think is what I have to do is I have to hold a mirror up to people, right? And get them to look at their behavior, be supportive, be present. I mean, that's the other thing that I really stress is being in the here and now. And getting people to kind of express themselves in the here and now and not be stuck in the past all the time, replaying things. It's one of the nice things about using EMDR, which is, I don't do it in terms of eye movement. I do it in terms of bilateral tapping, but it doesn't, it helps the amygdala, if you will, process information that gets stuck in the brain. And then the frontal lobes can go ahead and process that information. And it will take sometimes, if people are having images that, like in recurrent dreams, there was a person who was a rescue diver.
Let's get to that story. I'm going to have to take a quick break, but I want to hear that story. So when we
Okay.
come back, we'll get to that. You're listening to the Dr. Diane Show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. When we come back, we'll be talking more with James Osborne, holistic psychotherapist. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're back on the Dr. Diane Show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. I'm talking today with James Osborne, and you can learn more about him at pronaturalwellness.com. That's www.pronaturalwellness.com, pronaturalwellness.com. So right before the break, you were going to tell us a story about a diver.
Yeah.
Okay.
This was with EMDR. So he goes down on what turns out to be a recovery mission. There's a truck down in the lake, and he gets to the door and he gets it open and he cuts the seatbelt and he turns the body, and the head detached and came to his face mask. Right. Reoccurring dreams, just couldn't stop them. Right. Wasn't sleeping, and 2 sessions, no more dreams. Wow. Because he was able to process what was stuck in this fight, flight, freeze mode of the amygdala and get it processed through the temporal lobes. And that's the beauty of some of that, because then you can work with the material without it always replaying and replaying.
So can you show, when you say bilateral tapping, can you show us what you mean by that?
Yeah, that's actually, I'm just looking to see if I have my tappers next to me.
Can you use your hands?
Well, you hold these things in your hands.
Okay. Yeah.
There's another way of doing it. And so what happens is the tapping varies in intensity, and it varies in duration, and then the speed of it. So what you don't want to do is keep it the same, because when you keep things the same and it repeats, then you're setting something in. So if I may, for example, if I'm using a safe space for a person, because very often in therapy, you want people to be able to have a safe space, I can set that by doing a constant kind of tapping. If they're working on an image, I want to keep breaking it up so that the brain doesn't get to settle, because we do have 2 brains, well, actually I have 4, but we won't, I don't want to scare people,
That's another podcast.
That's a whole different thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so that's kind of the value of EMDR, and I use it in trauma work quite a bit. I've also used it, oddly enough, with people with developmental disabilities, and only because it came up once. I worked for a little while at the end of my career, working for other people, working for the state and the Department of Developmental Services, and worked not only with the families and also with the individuals with the developmental disabilities. And sometimes, given the right circumstances, that helped them a lot. And I have no idea why. I was just experimenting. It did get them to be able to focus and let go of some things.
Mm.
So,
yeah. So we kind of got on this topic now about trauma, and I know, because we talk a lot and because of the articles that you write, that more recently, the types of patients or clients that you're seeing now are people that are dealing with loss or grief or some type of trauma. So let's talk about that, because I feel like, especially on the subject of loss and grief, it's still something that people are just not comfortable talking about, and so how are you helping people with that?
Well, the first thing I try to do is let people know that grief is not a linear condition, first of all. I mean, it's not like, everybody looks at Kubler-Ross and goes like, oh, well, I'm working my way through the stages of grief. Well, it doesn't work like that. My experience is that it takes really a good 3 years to work through grief. And this is probably just anecdotal. I mean, I haven't seen any other studies that support this. The first year, though, is one in which you have to learn to live without the person, if it's a death, of course, um, in every social situation that they're not there. So it's Christmas, it's New Year's, it's their birthday, it's your birthday, it's whatever that's going on.
Well, let me
And
just jump in for a second. So you said like someone has passed away, but couldn't
mhm,
it also be a scenario where, let's say, a divorce or a breakup, or even like someone whose parent is maybe now having dementia or full blown Alzheimer's? I mean, that's still, it's almost like the person isn't there, even though they are. I mean, meaning
absolutely.
they're right. They could be still be alive, but not participating in your life anymore.
Right. And it could
Yeah.
be something where there's a loss of a limb or disfigurement.
Hmm.
Those are all losses of grief.
Right.
There's, you, it's a very good point you make. It's everything can fall into that category depending on how the person's point of view
Right.
and their attitude. Um, yeah, so it's new. That first year is all new. By the second year, yeah, it's easier. Third year, generally people have made peace to it with it. And so that's the first thing. And when you experience the grief again, it's because I said it's not linear. I think of it as a spiral going outward, so that after time, you may be reminded of the loss again, or something triggers, and you kind of slip back. That's perfectly natural. It's part of the ongoing process, and that becomes something that people just have to learn to accept in a way. So, and not give them a hard time, themselves a hard time.
Yeah, I think a lot of time people beat themselves up about it. Like they put a time limit on how long
Mhm.
you should be grieving someone, or even I've heard spouses say, like how long is my partner going to be, depressed about their parent dying or sad or whatever. And I feel like it's someone who says that typically is a person who hasn't lost someone very close to them.
Yeah,
So they don't really understand. It's going to take as long as it takes.
exactly. And it really depends on what we're doing in terms of processing that grief. You know, there's ways to, um, there are ways in which we can honor that person and still feel connected to them and know that they're not there. For example, we might have maybe they died and had a foundation, and now you're involved in that foundation. So they're very much present with you in a very different way, and yet you can continue to honor them. Or um, maybe you regale in stories. I use story a lot when I do therapy. That's why it's hard to keep me corralled sometimes. It's I had a mentor, Lee Silverstein, who I just loved. We worked in Greece together and Skiathos, and we had a program called Amethyst, and people came from all over the world to literally to be there. And Lee would always leave and write thank you notes and why he appreciated people. Whenever he left, he was doing this. And the first time I received it, I thought, oh my God, I'm working with a nutcase. And I, I finally asked him about it, and he said, I never want to leave anything unsaid. And then one day he left the island and went to Germany to do some work, was diagnosed with a blood condition. It wasn't exactly leukemia, I don't think. Anyway, he ended up going back to the States and never came back to Greece. And I went to the States a couple of times to see him, and he was content that he never left anything unsaid. You know, and to the extent that he made videos for his then daughter, who was really, I think, just like 2, and all the way up till she would be 21. And we made these videos, and he told her what he hoped she would be doing, and where what he was wishing for her and all these for each of her birthdays. And I have to tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in that house while he was doing that. That's the way he wanted to be connected. And I think he taught me a lot about what it is to grieve, because when we are present with people, when we can have these ongoing communications and not leave things unsaid, it is in a way easier to let go,
Hmm.
you
I
know?
have a perfect example of that. So my father passed away very unexpectedly. I mean, one day he was there and the next day he had a heart attack, and I wasn't even there. I was in Georgia when this happened, in Connecticut. And I remember the first thing I said to my mother was, no, I didn't get to say goodbye. That was like the first, I don't even think I thought about what I was saying. It just came out of my mouth that I didn't get to say goodbye. Like there was a lot of stuff left unsaid.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to get over that. And I
Mhm.
think it affected me in a lot of ways. It affected the way I was in relationships. It affected, I think, career choices that I made, like a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
I mean, I know that now looking back, he's been gone for 28 years. I don't think I recognized that as I was going through it. But as I look back now, I feel like, yeah, you made choices based on that
Mhm.
because you hadn't processed the grief, you know. And now my mother's has had a series of issues of, being in and out of the hospital with, two broken hips, and then she had a pulmonary embolism. She almost died. She didn't. But
Mm.
I've, over this last year, taken the time to say a lot of things that I wanted to make sure I said to her, and vice versa. And I
Yeah.
can tell you, no one's ever ready to lose a parent or any, significant person in their life. But I do feel like I'm more prepared. I feel like I'm going to be sad, but it's not going to be like that devastating, oh my God, I didn't get to say XYZ, you know, because we've had that time. So
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. I want to pick up on this again. We have to take a short break. You're listening to the Dr. Diane Show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. When we come back, we'll be talking more with James Osborne, holistic psychotherapist. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're back on the Dr. Diane Show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. You can learn more about me at www.drdianehayden.com. And I'm talking today with James Osborne. He's a holistic psychotherapist, and you can learn more about him at www.pronaturalwellness.com. So before we broke, we were talking about just my experience in terms of, losing someone very unexpectedly and things being left unsaid versus the completely different situation I have with my mother in the last year, and kind of
Mhm.
having time to prepare, to say whatever I needed to say, whatever she needed to say, and just how I feel about, you know, her eventually passing. And I feel much more, I was saying, I feel much more prepared. Like I'm still going to be sad, and it's still going to be, you know, devastating, of course, but
Yeah.
I have a different energy about it, a different feeling about how it's going to be.
Right. Yeah, and I think that you've hit on some really important points, and that is when we are present with the people that we love or people that we know and deal with them in really intensely in the here and now, then we don't have regrets, you know. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was about people with dementia. Well, just very briefly, both of my parents had dementia. My father had a temporal frontal lobe dementia, and my mother had Alzheimer's. My mother's came about after my father died, rather quickly, and it's really interesting because those years, um, many times, um, the lights were on and nobody was home, and that was a difficult piece to care for. Remember once my mother was sitting in talking to my father and said, "Who's the slow one in the other room?" I'm I'm looking around. I'm by myself, and I'm thinking, she thinks I'm the slow one. She doesn't even know who I am, that I was her son, and it was kind of
Right.
like, oh dear, okay. Of course, I told some of my other friends that, and they were howling. They were on the floor, laughing about it. But so yeah, there's all kinds of loss that we see, and it reminds me of, just really quickly, when I lived in Greece, I had people that were friends from South Africa and Rhodesia and places like that. And when they would say goodbye, their expression was not, oh, bye, see you later. It was, see you just now. And it always hit me that the importance of being able to say to someone, I see you just now, knowing that everything is going to change. We may not see each other again. There's this impermanence and there's this fragility to life that we really need to take a look at. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love that we're having this conversation just in general about, um, taking opportunities to make sure you let people know how you feel. I mean, I think that, colleague of yours who had the wherewithal to make all those videos for his child, what a gift. I mean,
yeah,
I can't even, that's priceless. Like when I think about it, if, my father had done something like that, I mean, granted, I wasn't that young when I was in my mid 20s, but still, it's so amazing that he, you know, had not only the awareness to do that, but he actually didn't procrastinate and he did it.
right. And the other thing you can do is, if you don't have the ability to do it, you can write,
Hmm.
right? You can write to
Sure.
someone, keep a journal that they can have, those things are, any way that you make that contact is okay.
In fact, now they've got these things. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but over the last year, actually before my mother had fallen the first time, I signed up for this, um like, I don't know what I'd call it. It's an online program, so to speak, where every week you get a question,
Hmm.
and or your parent gets a question, or whoever you want to do this. It's like a book that they can create for you, and you get this question, and it says something like, what is your, what was the happiest day of your life, or what was your father like, or where was your favorite vacation spot? I mean, all kinds of questions about, you name it, like all different aspects of your life basically. And the person can write like a couple paragraphs or a page or whatever answering these questions, and then you upload it into this document that it then creates a whole, at the end of the year, it creates a book for you basically, of
Oh,
essentially your parent or spouse or whoever, like whoever you want to do it for, or
mhm.
yourself obviously, of all these memories, which I thought was really awesome. And it's driving me crazy now that I can't think of the name of the website that it is. But I think if people just Google, like, memories that your parent can write and put in a book, it'll probably pop up. I'm sure there's more than one. But that's a way for people to, to kind of like help you get motivated or just give you ideas for what to write about. I thought it was so cool.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. I think that's a wonderful practice. I may have people do it now.
Yeah,
Thanks.
there you go. I'll find it for you. I'll find it for you. Definitely. And if people are listening to this and they can't find it, feel free to, email me, Dr. Diane Hayden at gmail.com, and I'll find it for you and shoot you an email back. And James, I'll look it up and I'll find out what the website is for sure. But it's pretty cool. You don't even have to pay for anything until you decide that you want the book put together and sent to you.
Yeah,
So
that's great. That is
yeah,
great.
yeah, definitely, definitely. I feel like I wish there wasn't such a, I don't know if the word is taboo or whatever, about talking about death and dying, but I still feel like our society is so, I don't know, no one wants to talk about it.
Right. Well, and that's very few people do, and it's really refreshing. I've been reading a book lately called "From Here to Eternity" by Caitlin Dougherty, Doughty, and she's a she has a she's a mortician in LA, and I guess she's written three books. "From Here to Eternity" is the one I'm currently reading. She wrote When Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. I think that's about cremation. And then the other one is Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs, or something like that. So yeah, she had some really interesting things, but it's about death and death rituals across different countries and things like that. And it's fascinating to see how people handle death. In the United States, not so much, it's a little more difficult. And I think it's, again, tied to denial in a way. We don't see that we have a limited time here, and there's this idea like, oh, I'll get to that tomorrow. I'll do this or that. No, you got to do stuff now because
Yeah. Yep.
it may
Yep.
not be.
And I actually have two great stories, two friends of mine that I know. One of them whose father just passed, and I forget what the type of cancer it was that he had, but basically, I don't, it was fairly quick in terms of diagnosis to when he passed, but he had a whole like when he went into hospice, I think it was a couple of days, but he was still really lucid. And he had
Mhm.
his whole family around him. And my girlfriend said, we just sat around for a day or 2 days and we just told stories. And he told stories. And it was sad, but it was also this beautiful process of being able to let him go and him letting go with all of us around and just being able to tell stories. I just thought that was so, and the other one was a similar thing as well, different type of passing, but similar in terms of that. I was like, wow, that's really beautiful if you have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's great. And that's if there's a need to do something, that's it. Communicate, right? Be present, listen, supportive, all those things that awareness does for us.
Right. Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, I would have loved to have that opportunity with my father, and hopefully I'll have it with my mother. But nobody knows.
Right.
So it's say the things you need to say now, but maybe you'll also get the opportunity for 24 hours to say whatever you need to say. We just don't know.
Well, that's what we want to do, right? That's the goal
Yeah.
of therapy, is to be present, to say what you need to say it in the most loving and compassionate way you can. Um, we don't have to agree on things, and we
Right.
can still honor differences.
Yeah.
It's
So
the
it's
care.
been a pleasure, James. I want to thank you so much for all of your amazing information. And hopefully, people will reach out to you at pronaturalwellness.com. And I want to thank all of you for tuning into the Dr. Diane Show. Please join me the first and third Thursdays at 11 Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. And I will see you back here next time. Thank you for tuning into the Dr. Diane Show, revolutionary expansion of mind, body, and soul with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. Tune in every Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern on transformationtalkradio.com. Center your thoughts on what you want and shut the door on every suggestion of fear, worry, or lack from your own consciousness or the consciousness around you. Once you master that, everything is possible. To learn more about me, Dr. Diane, and receive a free digital subscription of my magazine, visit naturalnutmeg.com.